The icy wind howled through Randsburg, Wyoming, in the winter of 1878, as Penelope Parker trudged through knee-deep snow toward her neighbor's property. The newly widowed 22-year-old had promised Sheriff Wilson she'd check on Owen Ingram's place while he investigated the stagecoach robbery that had left 4 dead just outside town. Penelope hadn't seen the reclusive rancher in days, and with the temperature dropping dangerously low, even a loner needed checking on. Penelope pushed against the barn door, her fingers numb despite her woolen gloves. The wooden structure groaned as it opened, revealing shadows and the sweet smell of hay. She took a tentative step forward, pulling her lantern higher. "Hello," she called, her breath visible in the frigid air. "Mr. Ingram, it's Penelope Parker from the adjacent property." A shuffling sound came from the far corner, followed by a raspy cough. Penelope moved carefully between stacked hay bales until her light fell upon a huddled figure pressed against the wall. Owen Ingram sat on the ground, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, his tall frame shivering violently. His normally sun-bronzed face was ashen, dark stubble covering his jaw. His eyes, usually sharp and alert, were glazed with fever. "Don't tell anyone," he whispered through chattering teeth. Blood stained his side, seeping through his fingers where he clutched his ribs. Penelope knelt beside him, setting down her lantern. "Who'd I tell?" she replied softly. "There's no one for miles in this storm." She reached toward his wound, but he flinched away. "You shouldn't be here, Mrs. Parker." "You're hurt," she stated, ignoring his protest, "and half frozen." "Let me help you." His eyes, a striking shade of blue even in his weakened state, held hers for a long moment before he nodded once. "Not safe," he murmured. "What happened?" Penelope asked, carefully lifting the edge of his shirt to examine the wound. "Ambushed," he managed, his voice barely audible. "The Blackwell gang. They think I'm dead." Penelope felt her blood run cold. The Blackwell gang had been terrorizing the Wyoming territory for months. If they were after Owen, they might return to confirm their kill. "We need to get you inside and warm," she said decisively. "Can you walk with help?" Owen grimaced. "Not far, lost too much blood." Penelope glanced around the barn, thinking quickly. "Then we'll make this space habitable. I'll bring supplies from your house." "No," he grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "They ransacked the place, might still be watching." "Then I'll go to my homestead and return," Penelope decided. "It's not far, and in this snow no one will track me if I'm careful." Owen's eyes closed briefly. "Too dangerous." "More dangerous than letting you bleed to death," she countered. "I've survived worse than a snowstorm, Mr. Ingram. My husband didn't leave me with many options but to become resourceful." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Owen, if you're saving my life, you might as well use my given name." "Owen," she repeated softly. "I'll be back before you know it. Try to stay awake." Penelope stood, but he caught her hand again. "Take my revolver," he nodded toward the gun belt hanging on a nearby post. She hesitated only briefly before securing the weapon. The weight of it felt foreign against her hip, but also reassuring. With one last look at the wounded man, she slipped out into the blinding snow. The journey to her small homestead took twice as long as usual, the snow hampering her progress. By the time she reached her cabin, her legs ached with exhaustion. Working quickly, she gathered medical supplies, blankets, food, and a change of clothes for Owen. She packed everything onto a small sled her late husband had built, then, after a moment's thought, added a bottle of whiskey and her shotgun. Pulling the laden sled behind her, Penelope battled her way back through the deepening snow. The wind had picked up, making visibility poor, but she pressed on, guided by an inexplicable urgency to return to the wounded cowboy. When she finally reached Owen's barn, She was relieved to find him still conscious, though his shivering had intensified. Without wasting time, she set to work creating a makeshift bed from fresh hay, covered with blankets. Next, she started a small, controlled fire in a metal bucket she found, careful to ensure proper ventilation. "This might hurt," she warned as she helped Owen move to the more comfortable arrangement. He bit back a groan. "I've had worse." "Somehow I doubt that," she murmured, noting the pallor of his skin. As the small fire warmed the space, Penelope gently removed Owen's blood-soaked shirt. The wound was an ugly gash about 4 inches long along his left side. While deep, it appeared the bullet had only grazed him rather than entering his body. "You're lucky," she commented, cleaning the wound with whiskey. Owen hissed in pain but didn't pull away. "A fraction deeper, and you might not have made it this far." "Don't feel particularly lucky at the moment," he said through gritted teeth. Penelope worked methodically, the way her mother had taught her. As a frontier woman, basic medical knowledge wasn't just useful, it was essential for survival. She stitched the wound closed with steady hands, despite Owen's occasional flinch. "How did you learn to do this?" he asked, watching her work. "My mother was a midwife. She taught me," Penelope replied, tying off the last stitch. "And my husband wasn't exactly careful. I patched him up more times than I care to remember." "I heard about Thomas Parker," Owen said quietly. "I'm sorry for your loss." Penelope's hand stilled momentarily. "Thank you, but don't be. Thomas wasn't a kind man, especially toward the end." She busied herself with applying a clean bandage. The whiskey and gambling took what little goodness he had. Owen studied her face, seeing the hint of old pain there. "Is that why you live alone instead of returning to your family?" "I have no family to return to," she said simply. "And this land is mine now. I won't be driven from it." Once the wound was dressed, Penelope helped Owen into the clean shirt she'd brought. The simple act of changing had left him exhausted, his face drawn with pain. "You need to eat something," she insisted, retrieving the food she'd packed. "Not hungry," he mumbled, his eyes drifting closed. "Eat anyway." Penelope pressed a bowl of stew into his hands. "You've lost blood. You need your strength." Owen reluctantly took a few spoonfuls before asking, "Why are you helping me, Mrs. Parker? We've hardly exchanged more than pleasantries in town." Penelope considered the question as she stirred the small fire. "Because it's the right thing to do," she said finally. "And because I know what it's like to need help and have no one to turn to." They sat in companionable silence as the storm raged outside. Eventually, Owen's eyelids grew heavy. "Sleep," Penelope encouraged. "I'll keep watch." "The Blackwell gang," he murmured drowsily. "If they come back." "I know how to use both these guns," she assured him, patting her shotgun. "Rest now." As Owen drifted into an uneasy sleep, Penelope settled against a hay bale, the shotgun across her lap. She watched the rise and fall of his chest, wondering what a man like Owen Ingram had done to earn the enmity of the territory's most notorious outlaws. The night passed slowly, with Penelope adding wood to the fire and checking on Owen's fever every hour. By morning, the storm had abated, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. The fresh snow sparkled in the early light that filtered through cracks in the barn walls. Owen stirred, his eyes opening with more clarity than the previous evening. "You're still here," he observed, his voice rough with sleep. "I said I would be," Penelope replied, offering him water. "Your fever broke around dawn. That's a good sign." He drank deeply before attempting to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. "I need to check the property, make sure they haven't returned." "You need to rest," Penelope countered firmly. "I'll check. What am I looking for?" Owen hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to accepting help. Finally, he relented. Signs of tracks, disturbed snow near the house or the tree line to the north. They were 4 men on horseback when they attacked me. I'll be careful, she promised, standing and stretching her stiff limbs, and I'll bring back more supplies. Outside, the world was transformed by the heavy snowfall. Penelope made her way cautiously toward Owen's modest ranch house. The front door hung askew, evidence of forced entry. Inside, the place had indeed been ransacked. Drawers pulled out, furniture overturned, shelves emptied. Whatever the Blackwell gang had been searching for, they'd been thorough. Penelope gathered what usable items remained: clothing, preserved food, medical supplies, and loaded them onto her sled. Then she carefully examined the perimeter of the property. The fresh snow had covered any tracks from the previous day, but near the tree line to the north, she found what appeared to be a sheltered area where horses might have been tethered. The snow there was disturbed and mixed with droppings, suggesting the gang had indeed waited there, perhaps watching the house. A cold shiver ran down Penelope's spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. She hurried back to the barn, suddenly anxious to return to Owen's side. She found him attempting to stand, using the barn wall for support. His face was pale with the effort, but his jaw was set with determination. "You shouldn't be up," she scolded, dropping her load of supplies. "Can't lie around forever," he grunted, taking a shaky step forward. Penelope rushed to his side, slipping her arm around his waist to support him. She felt the heat of his body through his clothing, the solid strength of him despite his weakened state. "At least let me help you," she insisted. "What exactly are you trying to accomplish?" "Need to check on the horses in the back paddock," he explained, "and figure out my next move." "Your next move should be recovering," Penelope said, but nevertheless helped him walk to the rear of the barn where a small door led to an enclosed paddock. 2 horses stood huddled together against the cold, their breath visible in the morning air. They nickered softly at Owen's appearance. "They seem fine," Penelope observed. Owen nodded. "Lucky the gang didn't take them. Probably too focused on making sure I was dead." He leaned more heavily on her. "Which brings me to a question I should have asked sooner. Did Sheriff Wilson send you to check on me?" "Yes," Penelope admitted. "He was heading out to investigate the stagecoach robbery and asked me to look in on you since you hadn't been seen in town for days." Owen's expression darkened. "The stagecoach robbery. That was the Blackwell gang too." "How do you know?" he sighed, allowing her to guide him back to the makeshift bed. "Because I've been tracking them for the past 3 months. Penelope stared at him in confusion. "You're not just a rancher, are you?" "I am a rancher," he said, easing himself down with a grimace. "But I'm also a Pinkerton detective." The revelation stunned Penelope into silence. The Pinkerton National Detective Agency was known throughout the West for hunting down wanted criminals. Their agents were respected and feared in equal measure. "The agency sent me to infiltrate this area after reports that the Blackwell gang was operating in the territory," Owen continued. "I've been gathering information, tracking their movements. 2 days ago, I got too close. They discovered who I was and tried to kill you," Penelope finished for him. He nodded grimly. "They ambushed me on my way back from town. I managed to escape into the woods, but not before taking a bullet. Made it back here, but couldn't get to the house. Barely reached the barn before collapsing." "What were they looking for in your house?" she asked. "Evidence. Information I've collected on their operations, likely hideouts, contacts in town." Owen rubbed his jaw tiredly. "I keep my notes well hidden, but if they found them, would they have information that could lead them to you? Or to me, now that I'm helping you?" Owen's eyes met hers, troubled. "I've never mentioned you in my reports, but they know where I live, and if they come back to confirm I'm dead and find signs of someone helping me." The implication hung heavily between them, Penelope straightened her shoulders. Then we need to move you somewhere safer until you're well enough to confront them or contact your agency. We? Owen questioned, raising an eyebrow. Yes, we, Penelope stated firmly. I'm already involved, Mr. Pinkerton, and I won't be intimidated by outlaws. Not again. There was a story behind those words, Owen could tell, but now wasn't the time to pry. Where would we go? Your place would be the first place they'd look once they realized I'm alive. Penelope thought for a moment. There's an old trapper's cabin about 5 miles north of my property. It's abandoned now, but the structure is sound. No one would think to look for us there. Owen considered the suggestion. It's risky, moving in my condition. Staying here is riskier, she countered. We'll use the sled, bundle you up against the cold. The horses can pull us most of the way. He studied her face, noting the determination in her hazel eyes. This woman, who barely knew him, was risking her life to help him. Why are you doing this, Penelope? Truly? You could walk away, pretend you never found me. Her expression softened. Perhaps I'm tired of walking away from things that matter. She busied herself gathering supplies. We should leave before midday while we have enough daylight to reach the cabin. Owen watched her efficient movements, feeling an unexpected warmth that had nothing to do with his fading fever. In his line of work, trust came rarely. Yet something about Penelope Parker made him willing to place his life in her hands. Preparing for the journey took longer than anticipated. Penelope fashioned a more comfortable bed on the sled, using hay and multiple blankets to cushion Owen from the bumpy ride. She saddled one of Owen's horses for herself and hitched the other to the sled. This isn't going to be pleasant, she warned as she helped him onto the makeshift conveyance. Owen managed a wry smile. Few things have been pleasant lately. I'll endure. The journey north was slow and painstaking. The horses struggled through the deep snow, and every jolt sent waves of pain through Owen's wounded side. Penelope led the way, occasionally glancing back to check on him, her face etched with concern. By the time they reached the trapper's cabin, the winter sun was already dipping toward the western horizon. The small structure stood in a clearing surrounded by pine trees, its stone chimney still intact. It's not much, Penelope apologized as she helped Owen from the sled, but it will keep us hidden and warm. Inside, the cabin was dusty but sound. A simple wooden table stood against one wall, with a small hearth opposite. A narrow cot remained in the corner, its old mattress still usable. Penelope quickly got a fire going while Owen leaned against the wall, exhausted from the journey. His wound had begun to seep blood again, staining the fresh bandage Penelope had applied before they left. Sit before you fall, she ordered, guiding him to the cot. Let me check your stitches. Too weary to protest, Owen allowed her to remove his coat and shirt. Her fingers were gentle as she examined the wound, her proximity making him acutely aware of the floral scent of her hair despite the circumstances. Some of the stitches have pulled, she murmured. I'll need to repair them. As she worked, Owen studied her face in the firelight. Penelope Parker was pretty in an unassuming way, with delicate features and expressive eyes. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical braid, though tendrils had escaped to frame her face. There was a strength to her that belied her slender build. You mentioned your husband wasn't a kind man, Owen said quietly. What happened to him? Penelope's hands stilled momentarily before continuing their work. He was killed in a bar fight 6 months ago, shot by a man he cheated at cards. I'm sorry, Owen said, watching her face for signs of grief. I mourned the man I married, she replied softly, not the man he became. She tied off the last stitch and sat back. Thomas started drinking heavily after our second season on the homestead. When the crops failed, he turned to gambling, Said he was trying to save us, but really he was just running from responsibility. Owen remained silent, sensing she needed to speak the words aloud. The last few months were difficult, she continued, applying a fresh bandage. He'd come home drunk, angry, sometimes violent. She glanced up, meeting Owen's gaze directly. The night he died, I felt relief before I felt grief. What kind of wife does that make me? A human one, Owen answered without hesitation. You didn't cause his choices, Penelope. She smiled sadly, finished securing the bandage. Perhaps. Anyway, the homestead is mine now. I intend to make it prosper, prove to everyone in Randsburg that a woman alone can succeed where a man failed. I believe you will, Owen said, and was surprised to realize he meant it. There was an undeniable resilience to Penelope Parker. The next few days established a routine between them. Penelope cared for Owen's wound, cooked simple meals from their supplies, and ventured out occasionally to check for signs of pursuit. Owen, for his part, regained strength daily, eventually able to move around the small cabin unassisted. They talked for hours, learning each other's histories. Owen spoke of growing up on a farm in Ohio, his decision to join the Pinkertons after the war, and his subsequent assignments throughout the West. Penelope told him about her childhood in St. Louis, her parents' deaths from influenza when she was 17, and her hasty marriage to Thomas Parker, who had promised her security and adventure on the frontier. Not exactly the adventure I imagined, she admitted one evening as they shared coffee by the fire. But I've grown to love Wyoming despite everything. It gets in your blood, Owen agreed, watching the firelight play across her features. Though I've never stayed in one place long enough to put down roots. Never wanted to, she asked. He considered the question. Never saw the opportunity, I suppose. My work keeps me moving. And what about when the work is done? When you've caught the Blackwell gang? Owen found himself without a ready answer. For years, he'd moved from assignment to assignment without considering what might come after. Now, watching Penelope tend the fire, he found himself imagining a different future. I don't know, he admitted finally. Maybe it's time I considered putting down those roots. Their eyes met across the small space, and something unspoken passed between them. Penelope looked away first, a flush coloring her cheeks. We should check your wound again before turning in, she said, rising to fetch the medical supplies. As the days passed, Owen's strength returned more fully. The color came back to his face, and he moved with increasing ease. Penelope found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, admiring the fluid grace of his movements despite his healing injury. On their 7th day at the cabin, Owen announced he was strong enough to return to Randsburg. I need to contact the agency, he explained over breakfast. The longer I'm missing, the more the Blackwell gang will think they've succeeded. Penelope set down her coffee cup. You're still healing. Another few days, I've imposed on you long enough, he interrupted gently. You've risked enough for me already. It wasn't an imposition, she said quietly. Owen reached across the table, covering her hand with his. Penelope, I will never be able to repay what you've done for me. You saved my life. She turned her hand over, her fingers interlacing with his. I'm not asking for repayment. The air between them seemed to still, charged with unspoken feelings. Owen's thumb traced small circles on her wrist, sending a flutter through her stomach. What are you asking for? He murmured. Before she could answer, the sound of approaching horses broke the moment. They froze, eyes meeting in alarm. Were you expecting anyone? Owen whispered, already reaching for his gun. Penelope shook her head, rising to peer cautiously through the window. 3 riders coming up the trail. Owen moved to her side, keeping low. Blackwell's men, he confirmed grimly. They must have tracked us somehow. What do we do? Penelope asked, fear evident in her voice despite her attempt to remain calm. Owen assessed their situation quickly. "There's a back window. If we can make it to the horses without being seen, we might outrun them." They gathered only the essentials: weapons, ammunition, and a small amount of food. Owen checked that his gun was fully loaded, then handed Penelope her shotgun. "Stay behind me," he instructed. "If anything happens to me, you ride hard for Randsburg and find Sheriff Wilson. Tell him everything." Penelope gripped her weapon tightly. "Nothing's going to happen to you, not after all the work I put into keeping you alive." Despite the danger, Owen felt a smile tug at his lips. "Yes, madam." They slipped out the back window just as the riders reached the clearing in front of the cabin. Crouching low, they made their way to where their horses were tethered among the trees. They had almost reached the animals when a shout went up from the cabin. "Check the back. They might have run." "Go," Owen urged, helping Penelope mount before swinging up onto his own horse. They spurred the animals forward, crashing through the underbrush as gunshots rang out behind them. Owen led them deeper into the forest, where the thick trees would provide some cover from pursuit. The sounds of hoofbeats followed close behind as they navigated the treacherous terrain. Owen's side burned with the exertion, but adrenaline kept him focused. Beside him, Penelope rode with surprising skill, keeping pace despite the difficult conditions. A bullet whizzed past Owen's ear, embedding itself in a nearby tree. He ducked lower over his horse's neck, calling to Penelope, "There's a ravine ahead. We can lose them there." The narrow gully appeared before them, a steep drop on either side with a shallow creek at the bottom. Owen guided his horse down the precarious slope, Penelope following close behind. The descent was treacherous, loose rocks sliding beneath the horses' hooves, but both animals maintained their footing. At the bottom, Owen turned to check on their pursuers. Two riders had reached the edge of the ravine but hesitated at the steep descent. The third was nowhere to be seen. "They're not following," Penelope observed, her breath coming in quick gasps. "Not this way," Owen agreed, "but they'll try to circle around. We need to keep moving." They followed the creek bed for nearly a mile before finding a less steep path up the opposite side. By the time they reached level ground again, there was no sign of their pursuers. "We should head east," Owen decided. "Randsburg is southeast from here. They'll expect us to go directly there." Penelope nodded her agreement, though her face was pale with tension. "Who were those men?" "Did you recognize them?" "Two of Blackwell's lieutenants," Owen confirmed. "Jed Harker and Samuel Ross, mean as they come." "How did they find us?" Owen frowned. "That's what troubles me. No one knew about this cabin except you and me." "Someone might have seen us leaving your property," Penelope suggested, "or tracked us from there." "Possibly," Owen conceded, though he didn't sound convinced. "Let's keep moving. We can figure it out once we reach town." They rode steadily eastward for several hours, sticking to covered areas when possible and keeping alert for signs of pursuit. By mid-afternoon, Owen judged it safe to turn south toward Randsburg. As they rode, Owen found himself watching Penelope. Despite the danger and exertion, she maintained an air of determined calm. Her resilience continued to impress him. "You're staring," she noted without looking at him. "Just thinking that you're remarkable," he replied honestly. She glanced at him, surprise evident in her expression. "For riding a horse, for everything." Owen held her gaze. "Most people would have left me in that barn or at least sought help from town. You didn't." "I told you why," she said softly. "You said it was the right thing to do." He guided his horse closer to hers. "But there's more to it than that, isn't there?" Penelope was silent for a long moment. "When I found you," she finally said, "you looked at me like I was real. Not a possession or a burden or a disappointment, just a person who might help." She shrugged slightly. It's been a long time since anyone looked at me that way. Owen felt something shift in his chest, a tightening that had nothing to do with his healing wound. Penelope, a gunshot cracked through the air, cutting off his words. Penelope's horse reared in panic, nearly unseating her. Owen reached for his weapon, scanning the surroundings frantically. There. Penelope pointed to a ridge about 50 yards away, where a lone rider was taking aim for another shot. They spurred their horses forward just as the second shot rang out. Owen felt the bullet pass close enough to stir his hair. They galloped hard, seeking cover among a stand of cottonwoods. "It's the third man," Owen said grimly. "He must have circled ahead of us." Penelope checked her shotgun. "What's the plan?" Owen assessed their position. "We're still a few hours from Randsburg, too far to make a run for it with him on our tail. So we fight," she stated simply. He looked at her with newfound respect. "We fight, but carefully." He nodded toward a rocky outcropping about 20 yards away. "If we can reach those rocks, we'll have better cover and a clear line of sight." They dismounted, slapping the horses to send them running in the opposite direction as a distraction. Then, keeping low, they made their way toward the rocks. Another shot kicked up dirt near Penelope's feet. She stumbled but kept moving, Owen close behind her. They reached the outcropping and pressed themselves against the cool stone, breathing hard. "He's moving positions," Owen observed, peering carefully around the edge, "trying to get a better angle on us." "Can you see who it is?" Penelope asked. Owen studied the distant figure. "Marcus Blackwell himself," he said with grim satisfaction. "The leader. Is that good or bad?" "Both. He's more dangerous than his men, but he's also the prize I've been after." Penelope gripped her shotgun more tightly. "What do we do?" "I'll try to circle behind him," Owen decided. "You stay here, keep his attention with an occasional shot in his direction." "No," Penelope said firmly. "We stay together." Owen turned to face her. "Penelope, this is what I'm trained for." "And what happens if you get shot again?" she challenged. "Or if he has backup waiting? We've made it this far together, we'll finish it together." There was no time to argue. Another bullet ricocheted off the rocks above their heads, showering them with stone fragments. "All right," Owen conceded, "together, but follow my lead." They moved in tandem, using the natural cover of the landscape to work their way closer to Blackwell's position. The outlaw was good, adjusting his location frequently, but he was outnumbered and eventually maneuvered into a vulnerable position. "On my signal," Owen whispered as they crouched behind a fallen log, now within 60 yards of their target. "I'll take the first shot. If I miss, you follow immediately with the shotgun." "Ready," Penelope nodded, her face set with determination. Owen took careful aim at Blackwell, who was momentarily exposed as he moved between cover. He squeezed the trigger smoothly, the report of his gun echoing across the open space. Blackwell cried out, dropping his weapon as Owen's bullet found its mark in his shoulder. He stumbled backward, falling to one knee. "Marcus Blackwell," Owen called, standing with his gun still trained on the outlaw. "It's over." The wounded man glared with hatred. "Ingram, should have made sure you were dead." "Your mistake," Owen replied, approaching cautiously with Penelope covering him. "Where are Harker and Ross?" Blackwell spat on the ground. "Circling back to town. Figured you'd head there eventually." Owen quickly disarmed and restrained the outlaw, using strips torn from Blackwell's own shirt to bind his hands. The bullet wound was bleeding but not life-threatening. "You won't get away with this," Blackwell growled as Owen checked his bindings. "I have friends in Randsburg, important friends." "I'm counting on that," Owen replied calmly. "They're the next names on my list." They retrieved their horses, securing Blackwell on Owen's mount while Owen rode with Penelope. With their prisoner in tow, they set out for Randsburg, now alert not only for Blackwell's remaining men but also for whomever in town might be working with the gang. "You think someone in Randsburg helped them find us?" Penelope asked as they rode, her back pressed against Owen's chest in the close confines of the saddle. "It's the only explanation," he confirmed. "Someone who knew you might check on me, who might have seen you heading back to your homestead with supplies." "But who?" Penelope broke off suddenly. "Sheriff Wilson. He's the one who sent me to check on you in the first place." Owen's arm tightened around her waist. It would explain a lot. A corrupt sheriff would be invaluable to an outlaw gang. The realization cast their situation in an even more dangerous light. If the sheriff was indeed working with the Blackwell gang, riding directly into Randsburg might be walking into a trap. "We need a different plan," Owen decided. "There's a telegraph office in Miller's Creek, about 10 miles east of Randsburg. We can send a wire to my superiors at Pinkerton and request backup." "That's at least half a day's detour," Penelope pointed out. "Better than riding straight into an ambush," Owen countered. "And we need to get Blackwell somewhere secure before his men regroup." They adjusted their course accordingly, pushing their tired mount as much as they dared. Blackwell remained sullenly silent for most of the journey, though occasionally he would chuckle to himself, as if enjoying a private joke. "What's so amusing?" Owen finally asked during a brief stop to rest the horses. Blackwell grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Just thinking about how this is all going to play out. You think you've won, Pinkerton man, but you're still walking into a noose." "We'll see about that," Owen replied evenly, though the outlaw's confidence was unsettling. As they continued toward Miller's Creek, the winter sun began its early descent. They would need to make camp soon. Traveling in the dark would be too dangerous. "There's a line shack belonging to the Faro Ranch up ahead," Penelope suggested. "We could stop there for the night." Owen nodded his agreement. "We'll take turns keeping watch. I don't trust our friend here and his men are still out there." The line shack was little more than a one-room shelter with a small stove, but after their ordeal at the trapper's cabin, it seemed luxurious. They secured Blackwell to a support beam, checking his wound and giving him water but keeping him bound. Owen built a fire in the stove while Penelope prepared a simple meal from their remaining supplies. The domesticity of the scene struck him as oddly comforting despite the dangerous circumstances. "What will happen after all this?" Penelope asked quietly as they sat together by the stove, Blackwell dozing against his post. "If we succeed in exposing the sheriff and rounding up the rest of the gang, I'll write my report to the agency," Owen replied. "They'll likely assign me somewhere new." Penelope stared into her tin cup. "Of course, that makes sense." Owen studied her profile in the dim light. "Unless I had a reason to stay in Wyoming." Her eyes lifted to meet his, a question in their depths. "What kind of reason?" "A compelling one," he said softly. "Perhaps the most compelling reason I've ever encountered." A flush spread across her cheeks. "Owen, I know it's been only days," he continued, setting aside his cup to take her hand. "But these have not been ordinary days. When I was wounded, you could have left me. When the gang found us, you could have fled. At every turn, you've shown more courage and character than most men I've known." "I did what anyone would do," she protested weakly. "No," he squeezed her fingers gently. "You did what only Penelope Parker would do. And in the process, you've made me question every assumption I've had about my life." Her breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when this is over, I'm considering a career change. Perhaps something that would allow me to put down those roots we discussed. In Randsburg, or wherever you might be." Penelope's eyes widened. "You would do that?" "I would," he confirmed, his voice steady despite the thundering of his heart. "If you thought there might be something worth exploring between us." For a long moment, she simply looked at him, emotions playing across her expressive face. Then, with a decisiveness that characterized her actions, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, but quickly deepened as Owen pulled her closer. Her hands came up to frame his face, fingers tracing the line of his jaw as if memorizing its contours. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I'll take that as a yes," he murmured. She laughed softly. "Yes, Owen Ingram. There is definitely something worth exploring here." From his place against the wall, Blackwell made a disgusted sound. "If you two are finished, I'd appreciate some water." Owen reluctantly released Penelope, moving to check on their prisoner. As he offered Blackwell the canteen, the outlaw leaned forward. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Pinkerton," he whispered. "By this time tomorrow, you'll both be dead." Owen maintained a neutral expression, not giving Blackwell the satisfaction of a reaction. But inwardly, he felt a renewed sense of urgency. They needed to reach Miller's Creek and send that telegram as soon as possible. They set out at first light, the winter landscape crisp and clear around them. Blackwell rode behind Owen again, with Penelope on the second horse. They maintained a watchful silence, alert for any sign of the remaining gang members. Miller's Creek appeared on the horizon shortly after noon, a small settlement consisting of little more than a general store, a saloon, and a few scattered buildings. The telegraph office operated out of a corner of the general store. "I'll take Blackwell," Owen decided as they approached the town. "You send the telegram. The operator's name is Jenkins. Tell him it's urgent Pinkerton business." Penelope nodded, memorizing the message Owen wanted sent. They separated at the edge of town, Owen leading their prisoner toward the saloon, which doubled as the local jail in the absence of a proper sheriff's office. Inside the telegraph office, Penelope found Hiram Jenkins, a thin, nervous man with spectacles perched on his nose. He looked up in surprise as she entered. "Mrs. Parker, what brings you to Miller's Creek?" "I need to send an urgent telegram," she explained, producing the coin needed for payment. "To the Pinkerton National Detective Agency in Chicago." Jenkins' eyebrows rose. "Pinkerton? That's unusual business for a homesteader." "It's on behalf of Agent Owen Ingram," she explained. "He's currently in possession of Marcus Blackwell and requires immediate assistance." The telegrapher's face paled. "Blackwell, the outlaw." "The very same," Penelope confirmed. "Agent Ingram has reason to believe Sheriff Wilson of Randsburg is collaborating with the Blackwell gang. He's requesting immediate backup." Jenkins' hands shook slightly as he prepared the telegram. "This is serious business, Mrs. Parker. Are you certain you want to involve yourself?" "I'm already involved," she replied firmly. "Please send the message immediately." While Jenkins tapped out the telegram, Penelope watched through the window as Owen escorted Blackwell toward the saloon. Something about the outlaw's demeanor troubled her. He seemed too calm, too confident for a man facing prison or the gallows. Jenkins finished sending the message, then waited for acknowledgement. After several tense minutes, the reply came through. "They confirm receipt," he told Penelope. "Say a team is already in the vicinity investigating the stagecoach robbery. They'll divert to Miller's Creek immediately, expected arrival by morning." Relief washed over her. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins." She hurried to join Owen at the saloon, finding him in conversation with the proprietor, a burly man named O'Malley. Blackwell was secured to a chair in the corner, his expression unreadable. "Telegram sent," she confirmed quietly. "Response team expected by morning." Owen nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "O'Malley has agreed to let us keep Blackwell here overnight. There's a back room we can use." "You sure this is wise?" O'Malley asked, eyeing Blackwell nervously. "That's Marcus Blackwell. His gang won't take kindly to him being held here." "It's just until morning," Owen assured him. "When the Pinkerton team arrives, we'll move him to a more secure location." They relocated Blackwell to the small storeroom behind the bar, securing him more thoroughly. The outlaw watched them with narrowed eyes but remained silent. "I don't like this," Penelope murmured as they stepped outside to speak privately. "He's too confident, like he knows something we don't." Owen ran a hand through his hair. "I feel it too, but we're safer here than on the open road. At least we have walls and people around us." "What if his men come to Miller's Creek? They'd have to know we're here," Owen reasoned. "And the only people who know that are us, O'Malley and Jenkins." Penelope wasn't entirely convinced, but she nodded. "What's our plan for tonight? We take shifts watching Blackwell," Owen decided. "I'll take the first watch. You get some rest." Despite her protests, Penelope eventually agreed, taking a room upstairs while Owen kept guard over their prisoner. The saloon continued its normal evening business, though with a subdued atmosphere as word spread about who was being held in the back room. Penelope found sleep elusive despite her exhaustion. Every noise from downstairs made her tense, expecting the worst. When a knock came at her door shortly after midnight, she was instantly alert. "Who is it?" she called, reaching for her shotgun. "It's me." Owen's voice was low but clear. She opened the door to find him looking troubled. "What's wrong?" "Probably nothing," he said, stepping into the room. "But Blackwell's been muttering about how they're coming for the past hour. Could be trying to unnerve me, but you think his men might have found us?" Owen nodded grimly. "We should be prepared to move if necessary. Pack your things." As Penelope quickly gathered her few belongings, Owen moved to the window, scanning the moonlit street below. "Town seems quiet," he observed. Maybe he was bluffing after all. The words had barely left his mouth when the sound of galloping hooves broke the stillness. Multiple riders approached from the east, their arrival shattering the night's peace. "Or maybe not," Owen amended, reaching for his gun. "Looks like at least 6 men." Penelope joined him at the window, watching as the riders dismounted outside the saloon. "That's more than just Harker and Ross." "Blackwell's been recruiting," Owen concluded. "We need to move now. Is there a back way out?" They slipped down the back stairs just as the front doors of the saloon burst open, the newcomers demanding to know where Marcus Blackwell was being held. O'Malley's protestations were cut short by the sound of a gunshot and breaking glass. Owen led Penelope through the kitchen and out a rear door, emerging into an alley behind the building. They could hear shouting inside as the gang discovered the storeroom where Blackwell had been secured. "They'll check upstairs next," Owen whispered. "We need to get to the horses." They crept along the alley, keeping to the shadows. The horses were tethered at a hitching post near the general store about 50 yards away across open ground. "I'll create a distraction," Owen decided. "When they're focused on me, you make for the horses. Get them ready to ride." Penelope caught his arm. "That's too dangerous. They'll kill you." "I only need to buy you enough time to reach the horses," he insisted. "I'll join you as soon as I can." Before she could protest further, a voice called from the saloon doorway. "Check behind the buildings. They can't have gone far." Owen squeezed Penelope's hand. "Go, now." With a last desperate look, she slipped away toward the general store while Owen moved in the opposite direction, deliberately making enough noise to attract attention. His distraction worked. Shouts went up as 2 of the gang members spotted him. Gunfire erupted, bullets splintering the wooden walls near Owen's head as he ducked around the corner of the blacksmith shop. Penelope reached the horses, her heart pounding in her ears. She quickly untied both animals, preparing them for a fast departure. From her position, She could see the men converging on the blacksmith shop where Owen had taken cover. A figure emerged from the saloon, supported by two others, Marcus Blackwell, free of his bonds. Even at a distance, Penelope could see his satisfied smirk as he watched his men close in on Owen's position. Making a split-second decision, Penelope mounted her horse and urged it forward, directly toward the saloon. The element of surprise worked in her favor. The outlaws were so focused on Owen that they didn't notice her approach until she was almost upon them. "Owen!" she shouted, guiding the second horse alongside her own. He emerged from cover, firing rapidly to keep the gang members at bay. In a fluid motion that belied his recent injury, he vaulted onto the second horse as Penelope rode past. They galloped down the main street, bullets whizzing around them. Behind them, the gang scrambled for their own mounts, Blackwell shouting orders through the chaos. "Head for the tree line," Owen called, pointing to a dense forest about a quarter-mile ahead. "We can lose them there." They pushed their horses to their limits, the animals responding gallantly to the urgency. The forest loomed closer, promising shelter from both pursuit and bullets. Just as they reached the first trees, Owen's horse stumbled, nearly throwing him. The animal recovered but was clearly injured, its gait faltering. "My horse is hit," Owen called to Penelope. "We need to find somewhere to make a stand. We can't outrun them like this." Deeper in the forest, they found a rocky outcropping that offered some protection. They dismounted, sending Penelope's uninjured horse running to draw some of the pursuers away. Owen's wounded mount collapsed nearby, its labored breathing painful to hear. "How many bullets do you have left?" Penelope asked as they positioned themselves among the rocks. Owen checked his ammunition. 12 in the revolver, plus I have a box with maybe 20 more rounds. 6 shells for the shotgun," she reported grimly. "Not enough if they all come at once." "We just need to hold out until morning," Owen reminded her. "The Pinkerton team will be coming." They could hear the gang members entering the forest, calling to each other as they spread out to search. The night suddenly seemed very dark and very cold. "Owen," Penelope whispered, reaching for his hand. "If this doesn't, it will," he interrupted firmly. "We've come too far to fail now." He squeezed her fingers. "And I have too many plans that involve a future with you." She smiled despite their dire situation. "Tell me about these plans." As the sounds of their pursuers grew closer, Owen spoke softly of a small ranch, horses running in green pastures, children playing in the yard. A life built together, day by day, season by season. His words painted a picture so vivid that for a moment, Penelope could almost believe they were already there, safe and happy. The fantasy shattered as a twig snapped nearby. They fell silent, weapons raised and ready. A shadow moved among the trees, one of Blackwell's men, searching cautiously. Owen aimed carefully, but before he could fire, more figures appeared from different directions. They were being surrounded. "I count 4, Penelope breathed, "plus Blackwell and whoever's with him. If we can take down a couple quickly, the others might lose their nerve," Owen suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. The standoff stretched into tense minutes, neither side willing to make the first move. Then a voice called from the darkness, Blackwell himself. "Ingram. I know you're out there. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender now and the woman lives." "Don't believe him," Penelope hissed. "He'll kill us both." Owen nodded grimly. "I know." He raised his voice to respond. "How about you surrender, Blackwell? The Pinkertons are on their way. This is your last chance to cooperate and maybe avoid the noose." Blackwell's laugh echoed through the trees. "By the time any Pinkertons get here, you'll be long dead and I'll be in Mexico." More shadows moved among the trees as the gang repositioned. They were slowly tightening the circle, eliminating any chance of escape. "On my signal," Owen whispered to Penelope, "fire at the man on the left. I'll take the right. Then immediately move to a different position." She nodded, raising the shotgun. "Now." Their weapons fired simultaneously, the reports deafening in the quiet forest. Owen's target fell with a cry, while Penelope's shotgun blast sent her target diving for cover. Chaos erupted as the remaining gang members returned fire, bullets thudding into the rocks around them. Owen and Penelope separated as planned, using the darkness to their advantage as they changed positions. The firefight continued intermittently, neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. Owen managed to wound another of the gang members, but ammunition was running low and dawn was still hours away. "We need to break out of this circle," Owen told Penelope during a lull in the shooting. "If we stay here, they'll eventually wear us down." "But which way?" she asked. "They're all around us." Owen considered their options. "East, toward the approaching dawn. If we can reach open country, we might spot the Pinkerton team coming from Randsburg." They gathered their remaining ammunition, preparing for a desperate push through the enemy line. The odds were against them, but staying put meant certain defeat. "Whatever happens," Owen said, taking Penelope's face in his hands, "knowing you has been the greatest gift of my life." She leaned into his touch. "We're going to make it, both of us. Those plans you talked about, I want them too." He kissed her then, a kiss full of promise and determination. When they parted, both wore expressions of renewed resolve. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," she confirmed. They moved stealthily toward the eastern perimeter where the trees began to thin. They had nearly reached what they believed was the edge of the gang's circle when a voice spoke from directly in front of them. "Going somewhere." Jed Harker stepped from behind a large pine, his gun leveled at Owen's chest. Before either could react, more gang members emerged from the surrounding darkness. "Drop your weapons," Harker ordered. "Now." Owen and Penelope exchanged glances. There was no escape, no clever tactic left to employ. Slowly, they placed their guns on the ground. "Blackwell will be pleased," Harker sneered, gesturing for his men to secure them. "He's been looking forward to dealing with you personally, Ingram." They were marched back through the forest to a small clearing where Blackwell waited, seated on a fallen log like a king on his throne. His wounded shoulder was roughly bandaged, his face pale with pain but triumphant. "Agent Ingram," he greeted mockingly. "And the lovely Mrs. Parker. Together at the end, how romantic." "It's not the end, Blackwell," Owen stated calmly. "The Pinkertons know everything. Even if you kill us, they'll hunt you down." Blackwell waved a dismissive hand. "Perhaps, but I'll be long gone by then and you'll be feeding the coyotes." He stood, drawing his pistol. "Any last words before I send you to meet your maker?" Before Owen could respond, the pre-dawn silence was broken by the distant sound of multiple horses approaching at speed. Blackwell frowned, turning toward the noise. "Who?" A volley of gunfire erupted from the edge of the clearing. Two of Blackwell's men fell immediately, while the others scrambled for cover. "Pinkerton Detective Agency," a commanding voice shouted. "Drop your weapons." Relief washed over Owen as he recognized the standard Pinkerton approach. The reinforcements had arrived earlier than expected. In the confusion, he grabbed Penelope and pulled her down behind the fallen log, shielding her with his body as bullets flew overhead. The ensuing firefight was brief but intense. Outnumbered and caught by surprise, Blackwell's remaining men were quickly subdued. Blackwell himself attempted to flee into the forest but was brought down by a shot to the leg. As silence fell over the clearing, Owen cautiously stood, keeping Penelope behind him until he was certain the danger had passed. 6 men in the distinctive attire of Pinkerton agents emerged from the trees, their weapons still at the ready. The leader, A tall man with a silver-streaked beard approached Owen. "Agent Ingram, Julian Montgomery, Denver office. We received your telegram." "You're early," Owen observed, finally allowing himself to relax. "We weren't expecting you until morning." Montgomery shrugged. "Pushed the horses hard. Good thing, too, from the looks of it." He glanced at the subdued outlaws. "I see you've been busy, that Marcus Blackwell himself." "It is," Owen confirmed. "And his entire gang, minus a few who are probably still in Randsburg with Sheriff Wilson." "Wilson's been dealt with," Montgomery informed him. "He was arrested 2 hours ago by another team. Apparently, he panicked when he heard Blackwell had been captured and tried to flee. Made it all too easy to confirm his involvement." As the Pinkerton agents secured the prisoners, Owen turned to Penelope, who stood watching the proceedings with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "It's over," he told her, taking her hands in his. "Really over." She smiled, though tears glistened in her eyes. "It doesn't seem possible. Believe it," he said, drawing her into his arms. "Blackwell's reign of terror in Wyoming is finished, and now—" "Now," she prompted when he hesitated. "Now we can start thinking about those plans I mentioned," he said softly. "If you're still interested." Her answer was to rise on tiptoe and press her lips to his, uncaring of the audience of Pinkerton agents and captured outlaws. When they parted, Owen kept his arms around her, unwilling to let go. "I take it this is Mrs. Parker." Montgomery approached, looking amused. "This is Penelope," Owen confirmed, "without whom I would certainly be dead and Blackwell would still be free." "Then the agency owes you a debt of gratitude, madam," Montgomery said with a respectful nod. "As does the territory of Wyoming." Penelope blushed at the recognition. "I did what needed doing, that's all." "A rare quality," Montgomery noted. He turned back to Owen. "We'll escort the prisoners to Cheyenne for trial. I assume you'll want to accompany us to file your report." Owen glanced at Penelope before responding. "I'll need to file my final report, yes. But after that, I'd like to discuss a change in my status with the agency." Montgomery raised an eyebrow. "What kind of change?" "A permanent assignment to the Wyoming Territory," Owen replied. "Or, if that's not possible, perhaps a discussion about my resignation." The senior agent studied him for a moment, then glanced at Penelope. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "I'm sure we can work something out, Ingram. Good agents are hard to find, especially in these parts." As the sun finally crested the eastern horizon, bathing the clearing in golden light, Owen felt a profound sense of new beginnings. With his arm around Penelope's waist and the future stretching bright before them, he knew with absolute certainty that he had found what he had been searching for all along. The journey back to Randsburg was markedly different from their frantic flight. Accompanied by 2 Pinkerton agents while the others took the prisoners to Cheyenne, Owen and Penelope rode side by side, their ordeal behind them, but its impact indelibly etched on their shared history. The town was buzzing with news of Sheriff Wilson's arrest when they arrived. Outside the sheriff's office, a crowd had gathered to watch as a temporary lawman appointed by the territorial governor took stock of Wilson's files. "Word travels fast," Penelope observed as curious glances were cast their way. "Faster than we did, apparently," Owen agreed. He dismounted, then helped her down from her horse. "Let's get you home. You must be exhausted." Penelope hesitated. "My homestead seems very far away suddenly." Owen understood her unspoken concern. After everything they'd been through together, the thought of separation, even temporarily, was difficult to contemplate. "Come with me to my ranch," he suggested. "It needs a thorough cleaning after the gang search, but it's closer, and I'm not quite ready to let you out of my sight." Relief flooded her face. "I'd like that." They made their farewells to the Pinkerton agents, who would continue to Cheyenne the following day, and rode the familiar path to Owen's ranch. The property looked much as they had left it, though the broken front door of the house was a stark reminder of their ordeal's beginning. Inside, the disarray was still evident, but somehow less oppressive than Penelope remembered. Together, they set about restoring order, working side by side to reclaim the space from the chaos the Blackwell gang had left behind. By evening, the main living area and kitchen were reasonably tidy. Owen built a fire in the hearth while Penelope prepared a simple meal from the supplies they'd purchased in Randsburg. "It's strange," she commented as they ate by firelight. "A week ago, I barely knew you. Now I can't imagine my life without you in it." Owen reached across the table to take her hand. "Sometimes the most important journeys happen in the blink of an eye. What matters is recognizing them when they occur." "And what do you recognize, Owen Ingram?" she asked softly. "That finding you shivering in my barn was the most fortunate moment of my life," he replied with a smile. "Even if I was the one doing the shivering." She laughed, the sound warming him more than the fire. "I suppose I should thank the Blackwell gang for shooting you then." "Let's not go that far," he grinned. "But their mistake certainly led to something wonderful." As night deepened around the ranch house, they spoke of practical matters, the repairs needed to both their properties, the approaching spring planting season, Owen's discussions with the Pinkerton agency about his future role. Montgomery seemed open to a territorial assignment, he told Penelope. "I could continue to work cases in Wyoming while maintaining the ranch." "You'd still be a Pinkerton agent?" she asked, a note of concern in her voice. Owen sensed her unease. "Not necessarily in the same capacity. More of an investigator than a field agent. Less dangerous work, more time at home." "Home," she repeated thoughtfully. "That sounds nice." "It does," he agreed. "Particularly if it's a home we build together." Penelope's eyes widened. "Owen, are you?" "Not officially," he hastened to add. "It's too soon for formal proposals. But I want you to know that's where my thoughts are headed. If you're amenable." Her smile was radiant in the firelight. "I am very amenable to those thoughts, Mr. Ingram." Later, as Penelope slept in Owen's bed while he took the sofa in the main room, his insistence on propriety overruling her practical arguments, he found himself mapping out a future more concrete than any he'd previously envisioned. The ranch could be expanded, the house enlarged. There was good grazing land to the north that could support a larger herd. With Penelope's agricultural knowledge and his own skills with livestock, they could build something substantial together, something lasting. The next morning, Owen rode with Penelope to her homestead so she could check on her property and collect more of her belongings. The small cabin looked lonely against the vast Wyoming landscape, but well-maintained, a testament to Penelope's determination and hard work. "It's not much," she said as they approached, "but it's mine, the first thing I've ever truly owned." "It's impressive," Owen replied sincerely. "Most men couldn't manage a place like this alone, let alone a woman with no help." "I had little choice," she said pragmatically. "After Thomas died, it was either make this work or lose everything." Inside, the cabin was neat and simple. Personal touches: a colorful quilt, pressed wildflowers in frames, books stacked carefully on a small shelf revealed Penelope's character in ways their rushed conversations hadn't allowed. As she gathered clothing and a few treasured possessions, Owen found himself drawn to a small writing desk in the corner. A half-finished letter lay open beside a worn journal. "My attempts to convince my former in-laws that I'm not destitute," Penelope explained, noticing his interest. "They've been trying to persuade me to sell the homestead and return to St. Louis since Thomas died." "And you've refused," she nodded firmly. This land represents my independence. I won't surrender it to become someone's charity case. Owen admired her resolve. Would you consider a partnership instead? Combining your homestead with my ranch would create a substantial property. Penelope paused in her packing. Are you proposing a business arrangement? Owen, he moved to her side, taking her hands in his. I'm proposing that we consider all possibilities for our future. Business, personal, and everything in between. Her expression softened. I like the sound of that. A true partnership. Over the following weeks, as winter gradually released its grip on the Wyoming landscape, Owen and Penelope established a new rhythm to their lives. They divided their time between both properties, with Penelope bringing her livestock to Owen's more secure barn while they repaired the damage to both homesteads. Word of their role in capturing the Blackwell gang spread throughout Randsburg, transforming them from relative outsiders to minor local celebrities. Offers of help with repairs came from neighbors who had previously kept their distance, perhaps out of respect for their privacy or, in Penelope's case, uncertainty about a woman living alone. By early April, Owen received official confirmation from the Pinkerton agency. He was being reassigned as a territorial investigator for Wyoming, with responsibilities that would allow him to maintain his ranch while still serving the agency. The position came with a generous salary and the understanding that he would only be called upon for significant cases. It's perfect, Penelope declared when he shared the news. You can continue the work you care about without the constant danger, and with considerably more time to devote to other priorities. Owen added meaningfully. Those priorities became increasingly clear as spring blossomed across the territory. What had begun as a desperate alliance born of necessity had transformed into something neither had expected to find in the harsh Wyoming frontier, a deep and abiding love, strengthened by shared trials and mutual respect. By May, Owen could no longer pretend that Penelope's continued presence at his ranch was a temporary arrangement. Her homestead, while maintained, stood empty more often than not as she chose to remain with him. On a warm evening as they sat on the newly repaired porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple, Owen finally gave voice to what they both already knew. "Marry me, Penelope," he said simply, taking her hand in his. "Not for convenience or protection or combining our properties. Marry me because I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person." Tears glistened in her eyes, catching the last rays of sunlight. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Owen Ingram, I will marry you." Their wedding took place in June, a simple ceremony in Randsburg's small church, followed by a celebration that drew people from throughout the county. Julian Montgomery traveled from Denver to stand as Owen's best man, bringing news that Marcus Blackwell and his gang had been convicted on all counts, with Blackwell himself sentenced to hang. "Justice served," Owen remarked quietly to his new bride. "Now we can truly put that chapter behind us." "I don't know," Penelope mused, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Finding you shivering in that barn led to the best thing that's ever happened to me. I might always have a soft spot for that particular memory." Owen laughed, drawing her close. "Then perhaps we should occasionally visit the barn for sentimental reasons." "Mr. Ingram," she gasped in mock scandal, "what would the good people of Randsburg think?" "That I'm the luckiest man in Wyoming," he replied, bending to kiss her amidst the cheers and well wishes of their guests. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys to the Ingram Ranch. Owen's work with the Pinkerton agency occasionally took him away, but never for long, and Penelope proved as adept at managing their growing operation as she had been with her own small homestead. Their first child, a son named James, arrived the following spring, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth. The house expanded along with their family, additional rooms, and a second story, transforming the modest ranch house into a proper family home. Penelope's homestead wasn't abandoned but repurposed first as a home for Owen's foreman and his family. Then later, as their operation grew, converted to additional storage and workspace for the ranch's expanding needs. Owen's reputation as both a rancher and investigator brought him respect throughout the territory. When Wyoming achieved statehood in 1890, he was even approached about political office, an offer he politely declined, preferring to focus on his family and land. "Politics would take you away too often," Penelope told him when he asked her opinion. "And I've grown rather accustomed to having you around, Mr. Ingram." "Just rather accustomed," he teased, pulling her close. "Entirely accustomed," she amended, settling against his chest. "Completely and utterly dependent upon your presence, in fact." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Then, I'll simply have to ensure I remain present, won't I?" On cold winter nights, when the wind howled across the Wyoming plains much as it had on that fateful evening years before, they would sometimes reminisce about their unusual beginning, a wounded man, a compassionate woman, and the simple question that had changed both their lives. "Don't tell anyone," Owen would quote with a smile, and Penelope would always respond, just as she had in that barn. "Who'd I tell?" The answer, of course, was everyone: their children, their friends, anyone who asked how the respected rancher and his capable wife had found each other. The story became something of a local legend, embellished over time but true in its essentials, that sometimes, in the harshest circumstances, one could find the greatest love. And on their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and a lifetime of shared memories, Owen leaned close to the woman who had saved him in more ways than one and whispered, "Thank you for checking on your neighbor that night." Penelope's eyes, still bright despite the years, crinkled with happiness. "Best decision I ever made, Cowboy, best decision I ever made."